Hey ANPers, this is Dr. Jones checking in. This is ANP1 Lecture Test 5, Video 24 covering page 25. Lecture 5, page 25. All right, so this next bit is not on the lab list because the limbic system is a functional group in the cerebrum. It is not an anatomical group. It's not a physical group. It's a functional group. It's how it works together. So 3 functions of the limbic system that we need to know are to establish emotional states. And remember, emotions are part of the higher brain functions. 2, it links the cerebral cortex, which are the highest functions, with the unconscious brainstem functions. Quick question, what does that mean? So your cerebral cortex does things like worry. And the limbic system takes that worry and links it with the unconscious brainstem functions like increased heart rate and sweating and your knee like vibrating on its own. Okay, so you know how sometimes you can see somebody's emotions written on their body and how they're holding themselves and how they're moving? It's the limbic system that does that for you. So that's the second function. The third function is to facilitate memory storage and retrieval. So this is what we're working with during a test, because this is how you retrieve memory is through the limbic system. Of course, the problem with that is, well, as they say in Dune, fear is the mind killer. So when you're scared, it shuts off this, I don't have the pen on yet, this prefrontal cortex, the front of the frontal lobe, and it literally shuts it off and it doesn't work, and only your emotional brain works. And it's hard to remember facts when, you know, you're just writing emotions. So, yeah, it's hard. And you've got to learn how to let it go and relax, which is not easy. It's like when you're a kid and they're about to give you a shot in the arm and like your arm is like one solid muscle because you're like, ah, and they're like, relax. And you're like, wait, how can I relax? You're about to give me a shot in the arm. There's no relaxing that. But you can actually teach your body to relax. Like think about like the beach. On a beautiful beach, on a beautiful day with like just everything's perfect. And take a deep breath and see, you've relaxed. You can learn how to relax. Like it's your mental focus that determines these things. To a degree, but still you have some say. So use it. Okay. And the corpus callosum is here. Let's switch to highlighter because I have trouble outlining these things because I'm not an artist. So this part is the corpus callosum. Again, corpus means body. And this is what I think of as the seahorse's hat. And it is white matter that connects the 2 cerebral hemispheres. It connects your left cerebral hemisphere to your right cerebral hemisphere. We're going cyan for the fornix. And it's this eyebrow right here. The little on fleek eyebrow is the fornix, and it's white matter that links the hypothalamus, which we have studied, to the hippocampus, which we skipped. So there you go. And the cerebrum, I think I've got another picture here. Yeah. The cerebrum, remember cerebrum, cerebellum. The cerebrum does conscious thought, intelligence functions, processes sensory and motor information. The cerebral cortex, which we discussed in a previous video, is gray matter on the outer edge of the cerebrum, like the rind is on the outer edge of the orange. And the basal nuclei are gray matter deep in the brain. And so these are the basal nuclei here, and we're learning a few of those in lab. Basal nuclei is a general term for that area of gray matter in the brain. Gyri, we've said, are the raised folds of the cerebrum. Sulci are the wrinkles, the indentations. Cerebral hemispheres are the two halves of the cerebrum, left and right. Longitudinal fissure is the brain crack between the cerebral hemispheres. And the central sulcus, I need to go back to the pen now. Wait, pen. The central sulcus right here divides the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. The frontal lobe is frontal, it's anterior. The frontal lobe is anterior to the central sulcus. It contains the primary motor cortex, which is the precentral gyrus. So now we have another name for that that is also called the primary, that's how you write primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. Okay, so the precentral gyrus is also called the primary motor cortex. And it's where you decide to scratch your nose, walk across the floor. It's what moves your muscles. It's the dark red stripe here is the precentral gyrus / primary motor cortex. So lab terms, precentral gyrus. Lecture term is primary motor cortex. Because precentral gyrus is the anatomical term, and primary motor cortex is the physiological term. That's what it does. Precentral gyrus is where it is and what it is. It's in front of the central, and it's a gyrus. So don't put primary motor cortex on the lab test. That's what I'm telling you. Don't do it. All right, so the frontal lobe also has somatic motor association areas, and of course the prefrontal cortex that we have talked about. Next is the parietal lobe, which is directly posterior to the central sulcus. It includes the dark blue stripe. The dark blue stripe is the primary sensory cortex, also known as the post-central gyrus. Primary sensory cortex. There you go. And that's the blue stripe, which thankfully, these are the same color codings that we have on the models in lab. Hallelujah. The red stripe is the precentral gyrus, the blue stripe is a postcentral gyrus. Yay! Okay, so the parietal lobe has that, and also the somatic sensory association area. So the primary sensory cortex, let's make that a bigger one. The primary sensory cortex is where basically everything that gets through the thalamus goes to the primary sensory cortex. So if you can feel your shoes, if you can feel your underwear, if your hair's up too tight, these are things you feel with the if you're holding a pen, you can feel that in the primary sensory cortex, which we'll talk about more for test 6. Test 6 is still neuro. So the spinal cord and more neuro. So we'll get there. The temporal lobe, which is this mustard color here, temporal lobe, is inferior to the lateral sulcus. The lateral sulcus is not a lab term, so you don't need to know that for lab. It contains the auditory cortex, the olfactory cortex, and those association areas. So auditory cortex is where you hear, the olfactory cortex is where you smell. That's what olfaction is. And the insula, which is inside and insulated, is deep to the lateral sulcus, and it contains the gustatory cortex, and gustation is, last special sense, taste. Although we didn't talk about balance. Okay. The gustatory cortex and, of course, the association areas associated, and the occipital lobe, which is the back of the brain, is where you see. So this is the visual cortex and the visual association areas. All right. That was page 25. Excellent. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. The education must go on. This has been A&P 1, Lecture Test 5, Video 24, covering page 25. Dr. J out.